She set the brass key into the side of the music box, knelt on the bare floor of the room that would be her unborn child's nursery, and sang the first note of a lullaby for a baby her husband, the Duke of Northcliffe, who had not spoken to his wife in 11 months, did not yet know she was carrying. The note was a low one, warm, and a little frayed at the edge, and it filled the empty room the way a cup fills with water, not loudly, only completely. Her hands rested over the small new firmness beneath her ribs. The music box answered the second note, then the third, the tin teeth lifting an old country lullaby from a melody she had not heard since her mother's house. She had carried the music box down from the attic an hour ago, dust still printed on her sleeves, her hair coming loose from its pins. She had not asked anyone's permission. She had not asked permission for anything in 11 months, because the man who could have given it had not spoken her name once since the day they were married. Celine Aldwyn, Celine Northcliffe now, in every register that meant nothing, closed her eyes against the soft, bright shape of the unborn child that lived inside the lullaby, and inside her at the same time. Outside the window, the last snow of the season had begun to slip from the cedar branches in long, wet ribbons. Inside, the room smelled of dust and beeswax, and the faint, cold sweetness of the music box's tin. She did not yet know that her husband was standing in the corridor on the other side of the door. She did not know that he had stopped where he stood the moment he heard the first note, that his hand had risen to the doorframe and stayed there, and that whatever wall he had been building inside himself for 2 winters was, at that exact moment, beginning to crack from the top down. She only knew that the child she carried had no name yet, and that someone in this hollow house should sing to it before the world remembered to. She let her voice rise into the second verse. The lullaby was about a starling that flew the wrong way home and found a kinder window. It was a foolish song. It was the song her mother had sung over her cradle and over her brothers, and Celine had sworn, a year ago, when she had walked into Northcliffe Hall in a borrowed travelling cloak the colour of dark amber and signed her own life away in a single afternoon, that whatever else went wrong inside these walls, she would not let her child grow up in silence. She did not yet know how badly she was about to keep that promise. A year before, on the morning of the wedding, she had stood in the small library at Aldwyn Park with her father's debts spread across the writing desk in 3 neat columns, and her future husband's solicitor across from her, with a contract that ran to 9 pages. The Duke himself was not present. He had not come down from Cumbria. He had sent the contract, the solicitor, and a single line of paper folded inside the contract that read, in handwriting so precise it looked almost printed, "I will not speak vows I cannot keep. The legal words will be sufficient." Her father had wept that morning. He had wept apologizing. Celine, who was 26, and had the auburn hair her mother had given her and her father's restless intelligence, had kissed him on the brow and signed the 9 pages with a steady hand. She had not signed them because she had no choice. She had signed them because she had read everything she could find about the Duke of Northcliffe, and what she had found was a man who 2 winters before had lost his first wife and the child she had been carrying within the same week, and who had not been seen at any function in any season since. She had signed them because someone had decided that this man required a new duchess and an heir, and Celine had decided, equally privately, that she would rather be that woman than the kind of woman who refused. She had not expected love. She had not even expected courtesy. She had expected, however, that he would say her name. The carriage had brought her to Northcliffe Hall on a grey March afternoon, with the rooks rising in black knots over the cedars. Lucian Northcliffe had met her at the front steps. He was 28, broad through the shoulder in the way of men who had once farmed their own land before they were dukes, and his eyes were the colour of slate after rain. He had handed her down from the carriage. His hand had been warm. He had not let his eyes rest on her face. The vicar had been waiting in the chapel. The vows had been whatever the law required, and not one syllable more. The Duke had said, "I will," twice, in a low and even voice, and he had said nothing else. He had not said her name. He had not said, "my wife." He had walked her back to the steps of the hall after the ceremony, bowed once, and gone away into the east wing. In 11 months and 10 days, he had not used her name once. He had not been cruel. That was the part she could not quite explain, even to herself. He had not refused her the keys to the household. The keys had been laid in a velvet box on her dressing table the morning after the wedding, with a note in his solicitor's handwriting that read, "The household entire is the Duchess's." He had not refused her his table. He sat at the far end of it 3 evenings a week, ate what was put before him, asked the housekeeper one question about the tenants or the tithes, and rose. He had not refused her his protection. The first time a London paper had printed something cruel about a duke marrying an impoverished earl's daughter, the editor had received a letter signed by his secretary that had ended the matter inside a fortnight. He had only refused her his voice, and his eyes, and anything that might have been called acknowledgement. She had survived it the way she had survived poverty in her father's house, by deciding that the silence was a fact about him, not a fact about her, and by refusing to let it shape what she did inside her own days. She had taken over Northcliffe Hall the way a competent woman takes over any neglected garden. The library had been opened first, then the kitchen accounts, then the tenants' winter coal. By the 2nd month, she knew the names of every child on the estate. By the 4th, she had reopened the music room. By the 6th, she had begun riding alone in the mornings, and the head groom, a grizzled man named Wickham, who had served Lucian's father, had begun saving the gentlest mare for her without being asked. She had not asked her husband for company. She had simply lived. And then, in the 11th month, she had begun to suspect that she was carrying his child. There had been 3 nights in the entire year when he had come to her rooms. 3 nights, all of them in late summer, when the harvest was in, and the house had been quieter than usual. 3 encounters carried out in a darkness so absolute, she had wondered afterwards whether he had been able to bear seeing her at all. He had not stayed. He had not spoken. After the 3rd night, he had not come again, and she had not asked why, because by then she had begun to understand that whatever wound he carried, he had judged her too kind a thing to use it on. She had not been certain about the child until the 2nd week of February. She had not told him. She had told no one but the doctor in the village, who had counted on his fingers and looked at her with grave gentleness and asked her, very carefully, whether her husband knew. And Selene had answered, "He will know in his own time." That morning, the morning the music box began to sing, she had decided his time had run out. She had climbed to the attic at first light, alone, with only a stub of candle and her stubbornness for company. She had been searching for 2 months for a particular trunk. An old letter from the housekeeper had mentioned, in passing, that the dowager's playthings were stored in the west attic and had not been touched since she was laid in the chapel. Selene had wanted, suddenly and without apology, to find one specific thing. A music box she had seen in a portrait in the long gallery. A little brass and walnut instrument carved with starlings that had sat on the Dowager Duchess of Northcliffe's writing desk in the year she was lost. She had found it inside a leather-bound case at the back of the 3rd trunk. The dust on the lid had been undisturbed. The brass had been dull with age, the key still slotted into its spring. Selene had carried it down the back stairs with both hands wrapped around it, the way a child carries a bird's egg, and she had walked past 3 startled housemaids and a footman who began to bow, and then could not decide whether to bow to her or to the music box. And she had gone straight to the room nobody used at the south end of the 2nd floor. The room nobody used was the room with the largest window and the warmest morning light. It had been the Dowager's sewing room. It had been locked since before Selene had arrived. Selene had unlocked it with the master key 3 months ago and had told no one. She had been planning the conversion in her head ever since. It was, by any measure, the room a child should grow up in. She knelt on the bare floor and turned the brass key. The music box gave its first note. Her hand found her belly. She began to sing. She had never been a great singer. Her voice was alto, low, and a little smoke-scented from a year of breathing the cold air of this house. The lullaby asked nothing of her she could not give. "Starling, starling, fly the wrong way home," she sang, "and the kinder window will know your name." The second verse went, "Fly the long way, fly the long way, fly the wrong way home." It was repetitive and a little silly, and her mother had sung it to her every winter night until Celine was 11 years old. She was on the third verse when she heard the door breathe. It did not open. It only breathed, the small, particular sound of a man's hand resting against wood from the other side. She did not stop singing. She did not turn her head. Her voice did not change. She knew, with the absolute knowledge that only comes when the body recognizes a presence the mind has not yet seen, that her husband was standing on the other side of that door. For a long, slow moment, she let him stand there. She thought, very clearly, if he opens this door, I will not stop singing. She thought, I have been waiting for him for 11 months, and he has been waiting for himself for 2 winters, and one of us has to stop waiting first. The lullaby reached its final phrase. Her voice held. The music box played its last tinny note and went quiet. She closed her eyes. The door did not open, but she heard him say, very low, very rough, like a man breaking his own throat to use it, "Celine." It was the first time he had said her name. She did not move. She did not breathe. The sound of her own name in his voice ran through her like the first warm water of a thaw. She felt, with a small, helpless smile, the absurdity of weeping over one word. And she did weep, 2 slow tears, and she let them go. Then she heard his footsteps move back down the corridor. Carefully, almost apologetically, as if he were afraid of disturbing the room, as if the room were now a sacred place, and he had been wrong to pass it at all. She knelt on the floor of the not-yet nursery for another long minute, her hand on her belly, the dust drifting in the strip of light from the window. She wound the music box again. She did not sing. She listened to the tinny old melody play itself out alone. When it stopped, she rose, brushed her skirts, picked up the music box, and walked out of the room with the particular steadiness of a woman who had just understood that her life was about to change in a direction she had not yet permitted herself to imagine. In the corridor, the air still held the faint, cold trace of him, that scent she had catalogued in 11 months of meals: bay leaf, leather, and the cold green of cedar. It was fainter now. He had gone. But he had said her name. She walked the length of the gallery, past the portrait of the Dowager Duchess of Northcliffe with the music box on her writing desk, past the door of her own rooms, and down the south stair to the breakfast room she preferred, the one with the morning sun and the chipped blue plates. She rang for the housekeeper. Mrs. Hadley arrived in her usual neat black, took one look at Celine's face, and waited. "Mrs. Hadley," Celine said, "I'm going to need a great deal of help in the next month." "Yes, Your Grace." "The room at the south end of the second floor is to be cleaned and repainted. Pale yellow. I have the color matched. I will write you the address of the painter in the village. He will know." "Yes, Your Grace." "There will be a cradle. I do not yet know whose hands will make it. We will discuss that another day." Mrs. Hadley's mouth, which Celine had never seen smile in 11 months, made a small movement at the corner that might have been the beginning of one. "Yes, Your Grace." "And Mrs. Hadley." Celine set the music box on the breakfast table with great care, as if it was still singing. "His Grace and I will be dining together this evening, in the small dining room, not the great one." Mrs. Hadley's eyes flicked to the music box, to Celine's hand still resting absently against her own waist, and back to Celine's face. The housekeeper had buried her own husband 3 Octobers ago. She had buried the first Duchess of Northcliffe and the babe in the same week 2 winters before that. She did not need anything explained to her. "Yes, Your Grace," she said. "I will see to it." Celine smiled. A real smile. Small and a little tilted. "Thank you, Mrs. Hadley. Truly." Mrs. Hadley bowed and went away, and Celine sat alone at the breakfast table with the brass Starling music box and a cup of tea that had gone tepid an hour earlier, and she let her shoulders drop, finally, for the first time since she had walked up the steps of Northcliffe Hall a year ago, in a borrowed travelling cloak. She did not yet know what her husband would do tonight. She did not know whether he would come down to the small dining room, or whether he would flee to the East Wing and disappear for another 6 weeks. She did not know whether the breaking of his silence in the corridor was a gift or a reflex he would punish himself for as soon as he reached his study. She only knew that she had heard him say her name. She knew that a year of silence had ended on a single word. And she knew, with the practical clarity that had got her through 26 winters and a whole bad spring of her father's debts, that whatever the next month brought, she was no longer the woman she had been at breakfast. She was the woman who had been sung to back. The East Wing of Northcliffe Hall was a wing in name only. It was, in truth, a single corridor and 3 rooms, a bedchamber, a dressing room, and the Duke's private study, that had been carved out of the original Tudor house and faced east toward a long lawn that ended at a stand of oaks. Lucian Northcliffe walked this corridor 4 times a day, the way a man walks a bridge he is no longer sure of. He walked it now. His hand was still trembling. He had stopped twice along the corridor, once at the window halfway down, once at the door of his own study, to set his palm flat against something solid until the trembling eased. It had not eased. It had moved up his arm, into his shoulder. By the time he reached his study and shut the door behind him, the trembling had reached his jaw, and he sat down at his writing desk before he could fall against it. 2 winters and 3 months of careful, deliberate silence ended by 1 word in a corridor. He set his elbows on the desk and pressed the heels of both hands against his eyes. His mother had sung that lullaby. His mother had sung it to him in the year of the long fever, when he had been 5 years old, and they had thought twice that he would not live through the night. "Starling, starling, fly the wrong way home." He had not heard the song in 23 years. He had not known he could still recognize it. He had been walking past the south corridor with a steward's report in his hand. He had been thinking about a roof and a tenant's debt and absolutely nothing else. And the first 3 notes had caught him at the back of the throat, the way a hand catches a falling cup, and he had stopped, and he had been unable to walk on. He had stood there listening to his wife sing his mother's song to a child she had not yet told him she was carrying. He knew about the child. He had known for 9 days. The village doctor was a discreet man, but the steward of Northcliffe was not the doctor's only friend, and a single careful sentence delivered to Lucian in the strictest confidence had been enough. He had spent 9 days walking the East Wing in the small hours of the morning, trying to decide what to do with the knowledge. He had come close, twice, to writing her a letter. Each time he had set the pen down. He had not known how to begin. He had not known whether he had the right. And then she had sat down on the floor of the room nobody used and turned the brass key in the music box and sung. He had said her name without knowing he was going to. The word had come up out of his throat, the way a body comes up out of cold water. Involuntary, almost violent. He had spoken it before he had realized he was about to. And then he had stood there, his palm against the wood of the door, and he had understood 3 things in quick succession. He had understood, first, that his wife had heard him. He had understood, second, that his wife was not surprised that he had heard her singing, that she had, in fact, sung knowing the door would breathe. He had understood, third, and this was the one that had set the tremor running through him, that she had been waiting for him for 11 months with the same patient steadiness with which a gardener waits for a winter pear to ripen. Not pleading, not pining, simply standing in her own life and leaving the door open. He took his hands away from his eyes. He stared at his own desk. The contract was in the 3rd drawer. He did not need to open the drawer. He had read the contract enough times in 2 winters to recite it. The Duke of Northcliffe will marry Miss Celine Aldwyn for the purpose of producing a legitimate heir. The marriage will be solemnized at Northcliffe Hall on a date to be agreed by both parties. The Duke will provide for Miss Aldwyn's family debts in their entirety. The marriage need not be consummated as a matter of principle, but for the avoidance of doubt, the parties acknowledge that an heir is the contractual purpose. He had written that contract in a state of grief so cold and so total that he had believed himself at the time to be doing the kindest thing a duke had ever done. He had needed an heir. He had been incapable of love. He had decided to marry a woman who was practical, well-spoken, and capable of running a great house, and to give her every legal security and not one unguarded word. And he had decided this was, on balance, the best deal she would ever be offered. He had signed it without reading her name twice. He had not allowed himself to think of her as Celine. He had thought of her as the new Duchess. He understood, now, with the slow horror of a man who has spent 2 years building the wrong thing, exactly what he had done. He had married a woman with the soul of a song and treated her as a contract. He had given her a house. He had given her keys. He had given her his name and his protection and the run of every account ledger in the estate. He had given her, on 3 carefully chosen nights at the end of last summer, the only act the contract required of them. He had given her, since then, his absence. He had not given her himself. And she had not asked. She had walked into Northcliffe Hall in a borrowed amber cloak and made it a home for everyone who lived in it except him. She had reopened the music room. She had paid the tenant's winter coal out of her own quarterly allowance because she had thought he would not notice. He had noticed. He had matched the sum. He had said nothing. She had ridden out alone in the mornings on the gentlest mare in the stable. She had taught the new kitchen girl to read by the kitchen fire. She had begun, in February, to climb to the attic at first light. She had carried his mother's music box down from a trunk no one had opened in 28 years. She was carrying his child. She had sung his mother's song into a room she was preparing as a nursery, alone, on a March morning, knowing no one would come. Lucian set his palms flat on the desk. He held them there until they stopped trembling. Then, very carefully, he opened the 3rd drawer of his desk and took out the contract. He did not tear it. He set it in the center of the desk and looked at it a long moment. Then he took a clean sheet of paper, dipped his pen, and wrote, in handwriting that for the first time in 2 winters was not perfectly straight. Celine. He stopped. He stared at her name on the page. He had never written it before. He had signed his own name twice, on the license and on the registry, and she had signed beside him, and that had been all. The shape of her name on his paper looked impossible, looked like something that had survived a fire. He took a slow breath. He wrote, "I beg you to forgive me for this evening, before you have heard what I have to say. I will come down to the small dining room. I will say what I have not said. I do not yet know all of it. I know only that I have been a coward for 2 winters, and that you, who never asked me to be brave, have already given me the courage I should have brought you on the day we were married." He stopped again. His hand was shaking. He wrote, "Lucian." He folded the letter in half. He stood. He carried it himself through the corridor to the small entry table outside the music room where she preferred to read in the afternoons. He set it on the silver salver. He turned around in the empty corridor, looked at the closed door of the room nobody used, and bowed, once, slightly, the way a man bows to something he does not yet know how to address. Then he went back to the east wing to dress for dinner. In the music room, half an hour later, Celine found the letter on the salver where the Morning Post was usually put. She knew his handwriting without unfolding it. She had only seen it twice before, on the line that had come folded into the contract, and on a single brief note 4 months ago, authorizing her to draw against an account she had not realized existed. The handwriting on this 3rd paper was different. It was looser. The downstrokes were unsteady. The ink had been pressed deeper than usual into the paper, in the place where her name had been written. She read it standing up, in the green afternoon light from the music room window, with one hand braced against the back of the harpsichord. She read it twice. She did not weep. She had wept already, in the corridor, over a single word. She had no more weeping in her this afternoon. She folded the letter carefully along the crease he had made, and slid it into the inner pocket of her morning gown, the one over her ribs, where the carrying child made the cloth lift very slightly with every breath. "Right," she said, very softly, to nobody. "Right." She rang for her maid. Henrietta arrived breathless from the laundry, took one look at her mistress, and shut the music room door with the particular gentleness of a woman who has been waiting 11 months for this exact moment. "The dark green silk," Celine said. "The one with the gold thread at the cuffs. Hair simple, no jewels." "Yes, Your Grace." "Henrietta?" "Yes, Your Grace?" Celine set her hand briefly against her own waist. She had not yet told Henrietta. Henrietta knew anyway. She had been Celine's maid through 3 bad winters in her father's house, and she missed nothing. The maid's small, bright face held perfectly still, waiting. "He knows," Celine said. Henrietta's eyes filled. She nodded once, a quick, fierce nod, and bowed her head and turned away to the wardrobe before Celine could see the rest of her face. Celine let her have the privacy. They had both been waiting a long time. The small dining room had been the dowager's sitting room before it had been a dining room. It had a low ceiling and a fireplace that smoked slightly when the wind blew east, and Celine had taken it over in her 2nd month for the simple reason that the great dining room, with its 40-foot table and its echo, made meals feel like a court-martial. The small dining room sat 6. Tonight it would seat 2. The fire was already burning when she came down. The candles had been lit. Mrs. Hadley had set the table with the chipped blue plates Celine preferred, not the gold-rimmed Sèvres, which Celine took for a small, private kindness and stored away. The room smelled of wood smoke and rosemary. Lucien was already there. He stood when she came in. That was, in itself, new. He had risen for her at meals before. He had the manners of his rank. But the rising had been mechanical, a courtesy delivered with his eyes elsewhere. Tonight he stood as if he were standing for inspection. He was wearing dark grey, with a charcoal waistcoat and a plain white cravat. His hair, which usually fell over his brow, had been brushed back. His face was very pale. The slate-grey eyes that had not rested on hers in a year now did, and held. "Celine," he said. It was the 2nd time. It was harder than the first. The first had been involuntary, a body's response to the lullaby. This 2nd one was deliberate. He had walked into a room intending to say it. She inclined her head. She said, "Lucien." She had said his name many times in 11 months. To servants, to the steward, to her own reflection in the dressing glass when she had been practicing not flinching. She had never said it to his face. She watched him receive it. She watched the small, involuntary movement in his throat as he swallowed. "Will you sit?" he said. "In a moment." She crossed the room slowly. She stopped in front of him, close enough to feel the warmth of the fire on her left side and the warmth of him on her right. She looked up. He was almost a head taller than she was, and she had forgotten, having spent 11 months looking at the back of his coat, that the slate of his eyes had a great deal of green in it close up, like a deep stone river. "Before we sit," she said quietly, "I would like to say one thing." "Anything." "I am not angry with you." He drew a breath as if she had pulled a blade out of him. "I have been many things in 11 months," she went on. "I have been lonely. I have been bewildered. I have been, on 3 or 4 nights, very tired. I have not been angry. I am telling you this because if you have been carrying that fear into this room, you may set it down before the soup." He did not answer at first. He looked at her, really looked, for the first time, at the entire face he had been refusing himself for a year. His eyes moved over her hair, auburn, half pinned, half loose, her brow, her mouth, the small scar above her left eyebrow she had earned at 12 from a fall in a hayloft. He took in the dark green silk gown. The gold thread at the cuffs caught the candlelight. He took in, last, her hands, folded in front of her, perfectly steady, and the small new fullness at her waist that the silk did not quite hide. His face did something that took Selena's breath. It did not crumple. It did not break. It simply opened, the way a long-locked window opens once the latch has been worked free. And behind it she saw, for the first time, the entirety of the man she had married. "I have been a coward," he said. "You have been a man in mourning." "Those are not the same thing, but they may share a corridor." His voice was rough, but it was steady now. "I owe you 11 months of speech. I will not deliver it in one evening. I would only get it wrong. May I deliver it slowly? And may I begin tonight?" "Yes." "May I—" He stopped. He was struggling with a word. She watched him work at it with a tenderness she did not bother to hide. "May I sit beside you, rather than across?" Mrs. Hadley has already set both places at this end. His mouth moved at the corner. It was almost a smile. "Of course she has." They sat. The soup arrived. He did not pretend to eat. Neither did she. They sat with 2 bowls of warming chestnut broth between them, and the fire crackling low, and the candles burning even. And he began, slowly, to speak. He spoke about Iolanthe first. He had not said her name in 2 winters either. He said it now, carefully, like a man setting down an object he had been holding for too long. He described her in 3 sentences. Small, dark-haired, 22 when he married her, 24 when she was lost. And then he said, "She is the reason I could not look at you on the day we were married. Not because you resembled her, because you did not, and because I could not bear the relief of that." Selene set her spoon down. She listened. He said, "On the day she was lost to us, the doctor told me, gently, I think, that the loss had been written into her body from the beginning, that nothing I had done or not done could have changed it. I did not believe him. I believed that whatever had taken her had been my own appetite. I believed that if I had not married her, she would still be in the world. I believed it for a winter. By the 2nd winter, I believed something worse. I believed I had no right to want a wife. I believed, and this is the part for which I will never forgive myself, that I would marry a woman of practical capacity and never speak to her. Because if I spoke to her, I would begin to want her, and if I began to want her, I would lose her too." He stopped. He looked into the fire. "I am telling you this," he said, "not as an excuse. I am telling you so you know what room I have been living in. I have been living in a room where the only safe wife was a wife I refused to know. And then you walked into my house and made it warm without asking me how. And you reopened the music room. And you paid the tenant's coal out of your own purse. And you began to ride out in the mornings. And the head groom started saving the gentlest mare. And the kitchen girl learned to read. And Mrs. Hadley smiled. Mrs. Hadley, Selene. And I thought every day, she is doing this in spite of me. And I—" He stopped. He set his hands palm down on the table. "I climbed up to your wing one night in December," he said. "I stood outside your door for a full hour. I had written you a letter. I burned it in the corridor before I went back. I have burned 6 letters to you. I burned this morning's draft as well. I will burn no more. I will say it badly to your face instead. Yes, she said. I knew about the child 9 days ago. I thought you might. You did not tell me. I was waiting for you to come to the door. He bowed his head. She watched the candlelight catch in the dark of his hair and thought, with a small, private astonishment, I am going to know this man. Celine, he said. 3 times now, 3 times in one evening, and her own name was beginning to belong to her again. I have no right to ask anything of you tonight. I will ask one thing only, and I will not ask it again. Ask. May I court you, from this evening, as if we had not yet been married, as if I were a man asking your father's permission to walk you home through a garden. May I begin again? She thought about it. She thought about it carefully, because she had not been asked anything in 11 months, and she wanted to honor the question. Yes, she said. On 4 conditions. Name them. You will not vanish into the East Wing for a single day without telling me first. Yes. You will eat in this room with me at least 3 evenings a week, and you will look at me when you do. Yes. You will tell me when you are afraid, even if you do not know why. He was silent for a long moment. His jaw moved. Yes. And you will hold my hand when you walk me back to my rooms tonight. She smiled, a small, mischievous smile she had not used in him before. I have been your Duchess for a year. I have not yet been walked back from a dinner. Yes, he said. His voice cracked very slightly on the word. Yes, all of it. They ate the soup, finally, both of them, slowly, for the simple reason that Mrs. Hadley would never have forgiven them otherwise. Lucian spoke a little more, in fits and starts, about his mother. He had been startled to recognize her lullaby, he said, and he wanted to know how Celine had found the music box. And Celine told him about the trunk in the west attic and the line in the housekeeper's old letter. He spoke about his steward and the spring planting. Celine spoke about the room nobody used and the pale yellow paint. They did not speak again about the contract or the 11 months. There would be time. There would be many evenings. At the end of the meal he rose, came round to her chair, and offered her his hand. She took it. His palm was warm and a little rough at the base of the thumb, the hand of a man who still rode out with his own steward. Her fingers slid against his and stayed there. They walked, like that, out of the small dining room, through the long gallery, past the portrait of his mother with the music box on her writing desk, up the south stair, and along the corridor toward her rooms. They did not speak. The hall clock struck 10 as they passed it. At her door he stopped. He raised her hand to his mouth and kissed the inside of her wrist, once, very lightly, with the gravity of a man who had not been permitted to touch a woman this way in 2 winters. She felt the faint scrape of his unshaven jaw. She felt the warmth of his breath. She let herself feel, the careful, terrified gentleness of his mouth against the thin skin where her pulse was. Good night, Selina, he said. Good night, Lucian. He did not stay. He did not ask. He bowed, turned, and walked back down the corridor toward the east wing. She stood at her door and watched him go all the way to the corner. He stopped at the corner. He turned just once and looked back. The corridor candles caught the slate and river green of his eyes from 40 feet away. He did not say anything. He only inclined his head. A small, formal, infinitely careful bow. Then he was gone. Selene went into her rooms, shut the door behind her, leaned her back against it, and laughed. Once, quietly. The laugh of a woman who had walked alone for a long time and had just been remembered. Henrietta, brushing the wardrobe, did not turn around. How did His Grace take the soup, Your Grace? Slowly. And the rest? Also slowly. Good. Celine laid her hand against her belly, and stood at the dark window a moment, looking out at the wet snow on the cedar branches. Starling, starling, she thought. Fly the wrong way home. She had begun, at last, to fly the right way. The next 3 weeks rearranged the geography of Northcliffe Hall, the way a new fire rearranges a long cold hearth. The east wing's door, which had been closed against everyone for 2 winters, began to stand open in the mornings. The Duke walked the south corridor at first light most days, not because he was crossing it on business, but because Celine had taken to eating breakfast in the small breakfast room, and he had decided, very deliberately, that he would eat with her. Mrs. Hadley, who had laid breakfast for one in that room every morning for 11 months, now laid 2 places, without being asked. The blue plates, both. The cracked one for him. He had taken to it without comment. He did not vanish. He told her every morning what he intended to do, and he came back when he said he would. The first time he was 20 minutes late, returning from the south paddock. A tenant had stopped him with a question about a sheep. He came directly to her in the music room, his coat still smelling of lanolin and cold air, and he apologized before he even removed his gloves. Celine, who had been rereading a poem, had laughed out loud. 20 minutes, Lucian. He had stood there with his gloves still on and his breath still cold in the room, and said, very seriously, I told you 11 months too late. I will not be 5 minutes late again without warning you. She had set down her book and gone to him, and lifted his cold, gloved hand and placed it deliberately against her belly. He had stopped breathing. She had said, very quietly, He is here. Come and meet him. He had stood like a man electrocuted by gentleness for a long, slow moment, his glove against the silk of her gown, his palm spread against the small, new firmness where their child was. His other hand had risen, also gloved, and joined the first. He had bowed his head. She had felt his breath shake out of him. He said, you do not have to say anything tonight. I will say one thing. Yes? He will not grow up in silence. No, she said, her hand on his wrist. He will not. That had been the 8th day. By the 12th day, he had begun to come into the music room in the afternoons. He did not interrupt her reading. He sat in the leather chair by the south window with a book of his own, usually his steward's reports, though once she caught him with a small, worn book of his mother's poetry that had been on the shelves for as long as anyone could remember, and that he had never before picked up. He read while she read. Sometimes their eyes met across the room. He smiled at her now. He had a slow, surprised smile, as if every time he found himself doing it, he was learning something. By the 15th day, he had begun to ride out with her in the mornings. Wickham, the head groom, who had served Lucian's father, and who had saved the gentlest mare for Selene without comment for 11 months, said, Good morning, Your Grace, to Lucian on the first day of this new arrangement, and almost dropped the bridle when Lucian said, Good morning, Wickham, in return. 3 words, the most Lucian had said to the head groom in 2 winters. By the 3rd morning, Wickham had begun to whistle in the yard. By the 17th day, Selene had told him about the pale yellow paint and the south room. She had said it carelessly, over toast, the way she said everything important. He had set down his cup. He had said, May I see it? They'd walked up there together, his hand on the small of her back. He had stood in the middle of the empty room and turned slowly, taking in the high windows and the morning light. He had said, My mother sewed in this room. Selene had said, I know. He had said, she would have liked the color. Selene had taken his hand and squeezed it, and not answered, and he had not needed her to. By the 19th day, he was no longer sleeping in the east wing. The rearrangement had come quietly. He had not asked. She had not summoned him. On a Tuesday evening, after a long dinner that had run past 10, he had walked her back to her rooms as he did now every night. At the door, he had not kissed her wrist. He had stood looking at her, his slate eyes very still. She had said, "Lucian, you are welcome to stay tonight. Only stay." He had said, "Are you sure?" "I have been sure since the corridor." He had stayed. They had not, the doctor's quiet caution about the carrying months had been heard by them both, done anything that the contract had once required of them. He had simply lain beside her in the dark, fully dressed in shirt sleeves and trousers, with one hand spread carefully over her belly. And he had told her about his childhood, about the year of the long fever, about the lullaby, about the music box, about the sister he had lost at 9, the older brother who had been taken by Scarlet at 15, the mother who had lasted into his 21st year, about Iolanthe's small dark hands, and the fact that she had hated horses and loved drawing the wrong things, chimney pots, kitchen utensils, the back of a footman's head, about the day Iolanthe had been lost to him and what the doctor had told him, and how he had been unable to believe it for 2 winters. He had wept once, quietly, into her hair, near 3 in the morning. She had held him. She had not tried to mend anything. She had only held him. He had slept, finally, with his head against her shoulder. By the 21st day, the door of the east wing stood open all the time, and his books had migrated one at a time to her sitting room, and Henrietta had begun referring to His Grace's brushes on Her Grace's dressing table without irony. By the 23rd day, Celine had begun to think she had imagined the 11 months entirely. By the 24th day, Lady Beatrice Linden arrived from London, and Celine remembered exactly why she had not. The carriage came up the drive at 3 in the afternoon. Celine saw it from the music room window. She did not recognize the crest. She rang for Mrs. Hadley. "Lady Beatrice Linden, Your Grace," Mrs. Hadley said, having read the crest from 40 paces with the practiced eye of a housekeeper. Her voice held a flatness that Celine had learned to read. "Tell me." Mrs. Hadley hesitated. "Lady Beatrice is the late Duchess's elder sister, Your Grace. She has not been to Northcliffe Hall since the funeral." "Has she been invited?" "No, Your Grace." Celine felt the small, cold tightening at the base of her ribs that meant a problem had walked into her house. She set down her book. "Where is His Grace?" "In the south paddock, Your Grace. He should be back within the hour." "Send Wickham to fetch him quietly. Do not alarm him." Celine rose. "And put Lady Beatrice in the great drawing room. Not the music room, not the small parlour. The great drawing room, with the cold north light, please, Mrs. Hadley." The corner of Mrs. Hadley's mouth moved. "Yes, Your Grace." Celine went to her dressing room. She did not change. She had learned a long time ago, from her father, that a woman who changed her clothes for an unannounced caller had already conceded her ground. She did smooth her hair. She did pin a small brooch, a brass starling, made from a fragment of the music box's casing that she had asked the village smith to set into a pin a week ago, to the bodice of her plain morning gown. She walked into the great drawing room 3 minutes after Lady Beatrice Linden had been put in it, and she found Lady Beatrice standing at the window with her gloves off, examining a portrait on the far wall, as if she were valuing it. "Lady Beatrice." The visitor turned. She was, Celine saw at once, beautiful. The Linden family had bequeathed Iolanthe her small, dark prettiness. It had given her elder sister the same colouring, with a harder bone structure and 10 more years of practice. Lady Beatrice was perhaps 36. Her hair was the colour of a black violin. Her eyes were a hard, clever brown. She wore a travelling gown of deep aubergine silk that had cost more than the entire winter coal account at Northcliffe Hall. Her smile was composed. "Your Grace," she said, "forgive me for arriving without warning. I have been concerned." "Have you? Please, sit." "I would prefer to stand a moment longer. The journey was tedious. Surely the air will help." Celine did not insist. She sat. She waited. "I have come from London," Lady Beatrice said, "where, you may not be aware, Certain rumors have begun to circulate about the state of my late sister's husband's establishment. How regrettable. I have come to satisfy myself as to my dear nephew's, by which I mean Lucian's, well-being. His well-being is excellent, I thank you. I am told you are with child. Celine did not blink. The village doctor was discreet. The steward's friend was less so, and Lady Beatrice Linden kept correspondence in 3 counties. Celine had assumed it would reach London eventually. She had not assumed it would arrive at Northcliffe Hall in aubergine silk. That is also true, Celine said. I am told that Lucian, forgive me, His Grace, has not, in your 11 months of marriage, been observed to address you in public. Lady Beatrice, why have you come? The other woman set her gloves on the table beside her. The smile did not change. I have come, she said, to ascertain whether the child is his. The fire crackled. Celine let the question sit in the room without answering it. She had read her father's debts at 24. She had stood at her own wedding while the Duke said, I will, and nothing more. She had heard her own name and his voice in a corridor on a March morning. She had been built, by her life, to receive a sentence like Lady Beatrice's without flinching. And she did not flinch now. Lady Beatrice, she said, very evenly, you will say that once. You will not say it again. If you say it again, in this house, or in any drawing room in London, or in any letter you write to anyone in this kingdom, you will discover that a duchess of 1 year's standing has more friends than you anticipated. Lady Beatrice's eyebrows rose slightly. Threats, Your Grace. Information. From a woman whose own husband does not speak to her. From a woman whose husband walked her back to her rooms last night, Celine said, and was eating breakfast at her table this morning. You may ask Mrs. Hadley if you require corroboration. She has been laying 2 places. Mrs. Hadley, Lady Beatrice said, is in your employ. Mrs. Hadley, Celine said, buried your sister. Mrs. Hadley has been here longer than either of us. If you wish to call Mrs. Hadley a liar in her own house, I invite you to do so to her face. You will find her in the housekeeper's room. Take the 3rd corridor on your left. There was a very small silence. Lady Beatrice picked up her gloves. I see, she said. Her smile was a different smile now, a little tighter, a little less composed. I see I have been misinformed. You have been informed by people who hoped you would do their work for them. They are gambling that I will buckle under a question. They have lost, and so have you. Sit down, Lady Beatrice. I'm about to offer you tea. The other woman did not sit. The other woman was, very visibly, recalibrating. You cannot, Lady Beatrice said, have the slightest idea of my position in this house. Your sister was the first Duchess of Northcliffe. I will not pretend otherwise. Your sister is buried in the chapel below the south lawn. I visited her the 2nd week I was here, before I had unpacked my own trunks, with a winter rose from the conservatory. She was loved. She is mourned. She is also gone, Lady Beatrice, and I am the woman who is carrying the next generation of this family in her body. And I will not be questioned about that child by anyone, including you, including the king himself, including Lucian if it ever came to it, which it will not. I will have tea in this room, or I will have you out of it. Choose. A door opened behind Celine. She did not need to turn. She knew, by the quality of the air, by the change in the smell of the room, bay leaf and leather and cedar, that Lucian had come in. He had come in quietly. He must have been standing in the corridor. Beatrice, he said. His voice was very low and very calm, and the entire room rearranged itself around it. Lady Beatrice's beautiful, hard face, which had been holding its composure through Celine's sentences with an effort, now broke very slightly at the edges. Lucian? You will sit down. You will drink the tea my wife has offered you. You will not speak of my child again in any room you enter for the rest of your life. And then a carriage will take you back to London tonight, and you will not return to this house again unless my wife, Beatrice, invites you. Lucian, sit, Beatrice. She sat. Celine rose, crossed the room, and rang for Mrs. Hadley. Mrs. Hadley arrived as if she had been waiting in the corridor, which she had. Mrs. Hadley, tea for 3, the good china, cake. There was a lemon and thyme this morning. Bring it all. Yes, Your Grace. Lady Beatrice will be leaving on the 7 o'clock road for the Penrith Inn. Have her trunk loaded. Yes, Your Grace. When Mrs. Hadley had gone, Celine returned to her chair. She did not sit beside Lucian. She let him stand a moment longer, his hand on the back of her chair, his eyes on Lady Beatrice. Then he looked down at Celine. His face had a quality she had not seen on it before. Something like fury, banked. Something like awe. Something like a man who had finally understood, beyond any further argument, what kind of woman he had married. Celine, he said softly. I know, she said. Sit. The tea is coming. He sat. The 3 of them sat in the great drawing room with the cold north light. Mrs. Hadley brought the tea and the lemon cake. Celine poured for all 3 of them. She passed Lady Beatrice her cup with both hands, and the small, even smile of a woman who had been raised by an earl and had no interest in punishing a guest beyond what was necessary. Lady Beatrice drank her tea. She did not speak until Celine asked her, mildly, about a mutual acquaintance in town. She answered carefully. By the time the lemon cake was gone, the drawing room was once again a drawing room, and not a battlefield. The 7 o'clock carriage took Lady Beatrice back down the drive at 5 minutes past 7. Celine and Lucian stood on the front steps to see her off. He had taken her hand at some point during the leave-taking, and he did not let it go. The carriage disappeared into the cedars. Celine let out a long breath. Well, I am, Lucian said. Do not apologize. I was about to thank you. She turned to him. His slate eyes were very full of her. The cold March air had reddened the bridge of his nose. She thought, I have been married to this man for a year, and I have never seen him on the front steps in cold air. I have been missing weather. You are welcome, she said. Celine. He did not let her hand go. I would marry you again tomorrow. In words, with my own voice. At a font, in front of every person you would want to be there. I want you to hear me say the vows. I have not said them to you, and I would like to say them to you. She looked up at him. The wet March wind moved her hair across her face. He brushed it back behind her ear with one finger, very gently, and the gesture was so unstudied, so unlike a man who had once written her a contract, that it was more devastating than any speech. All right, she said. Yes, we will marry again. In April, before the child comes. In April, quietly, in our own chapel. Mrs. Hadley as a witness, Wickham as a witness, Henrietta as a witness. Yes. And you will write the vows? I will. And you will read them aloud? I will. He bent and kissed her, properly this time, with the cold air on both their faces, and she stood on the front steps of Northcliffe Hall with one hand on the back of his neck and one hand against her belly, and felt, for the first time in 26 years, that she had stopped travelling and arrived. April came. The wet snow gave up. The first of the cherry blossom showed its colour at the edge of the south lawn. The room nobody used, which was now everybody's favourite room, had been painted pale yellow and furnished with a low cradle of carved oak made by the village joiner, who had refused to be paid more than the cost of the wood. Celine's belly had grown into a small, steady mountain that she carried with the unembarrassed satisfaction of a woman who had wanted this for longer than she had admitted. On the first Saturday of the month, in the chapel below the south lawn, Lucian Northcliffe married Celine Aldwyn for the second time. The vicar from the village conducted the service. Mrs. Hadley, Wickham and Henrietta stood as witnesses. A robin sang outside the chapel window throughout the ceremony, with the particular determination of a bird who has decided that he, too, has a part to play. Lucian read his own vows, in a voice that was steady the whole way through. He said, "I take you, Celine. I take you in this house and out of it. I take you in cold weather and in warm. I take you on the days I cannot speak, and on the days I cannot stop. I take you knowing that I have been a coward, and knowing that you have already forgiven me, and knowing that my forgiveness is a thing I will earn with the rest of my life, and not with one good speech. I will tell you when I am afraid. I will not vanish. I will eat at your table and look at you when I do. I will hold your hand when I walk you back to our rooms. I will sing to our child, badly. I will sing the song my mother sang to me. I will sing the song you sang on a March morning that brought me back into the house. I take you, Celine, who has been my wife for a year and a month, and who I will be married to for the rest of my life." Celine wept once during the vows, a single tear, quickly wiped, not from sadness, and then steadied her voice and read her own. She said, "I take you, Lucian. I take you with the 11 months, and I take you without them. I take you in your silence and in your speech. I take you on the days you can be brave and on the days you cannot. I take you, knowing that you will love this child very loudly and very carefully. And I take you knowing that you will love me the same. I will tell you when I am tired. I will let you walk me back. I will sit with you in the music room in the afternoons. I will sing again. I will sing to our child. I will sing to you. I take you, Lucian, who said my name in a corridor on a March morning, and who has been speaking it ever since, and who will go on speaking it." The vicar pronounced them. Lucian kissed her gently before the witnesses. Wickham wept openly. Mrs. Hadley did not weep, but smiled. Really, fully, the way a woman smiles when she has been waiting a long time. Henrietta, who had been waiting longest, smiled too, and kissed Celine on both cheeks afterwards with the freedom of a sister. They walked back to the house arm in arm through the cherry blossom. 5 weeks later, on a warm May afternoon, with the windows open and the room full of southern light, Celine gave birth to a small, healthy boy, with his father's slate and river green eyes and his mother's auburn hair. And the village doctor, who had counted on his fingers in February and who had not slept for 2 days, said, "Both of them are well. Both of them are very well, Your Grace," and walked out of the room blinking hard. Lucian stayed. He held the child first. The boy, whose name they had chosen the night before, was Henry, after Lucian's mother's father, and he held him with the wide, surprised hands of a man who had just discovered an entire continent inside his own arms. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He set the child against Celine's shoulder. He kissed Celine's forehead. He kissed her mouth. He kissed the small, fluttering crown of the baby's head. And then, very quietly, sitting on the edge of the bed in the warm May afternoon with the windows open, the Duke of Northcliffe began to sing. He had a low voice, slightly off the note in the second phrase, the way a man sings who has not sung since he was a child. He sang the lullaby his mother had sung him in the year of the long fever. He sang the lullaby Celine had sung in the room nobody used on a March morning. He sang the lullaby they would sing, alternately, every night for many years to come, in the pale yellow nursery with the brass starling music box on the windowsill. "Starling, starling, fly the wrong way home," he sang, "and the kinder window will know your name." Celine listened, her eyes half closed, her son's small, steady weight against her shoulder, her husband's voice rough and tender in her ear. She had walked into Northcliffe Hall a year and 2 months ago in a borrowed amber cloak. She had walked into a house of silence. She had become, by patience and by stubbornness, and by a single song in an empty room, the woman who had brought it back into voice. Outside, the May light moved on the cedars. The robin who had sung at the wedding sang again, somewhere in the south orchard. Mrs. Hadley, who had buried 2 duchesses in her lifetime, and who had laid 2 breakfast plates every morning for 19 days now, set a cup of warm broth on the table by the door and went away without disturbing any of them. The brass Starling music box sat on the windowsill, silent for the moment, its key in its spring, waiting for the small hands that would, in time, learn to wind it. Inside, the family sang. If you have ever waited a long time for someone to come to the door, quietly, without drama, without giving up, simply standing in your own life and leaving the latch undone, then you already know what Selene felt that May afternoon. You know that the bravest thing a person can do is sometimes nothing more than sing, in an empty room, the song they were sung when they were small. Tell me in the comments which song you would sing. I will be reading every one. And if you have a moment, click the bell. There is another fireside story coming for you tomorrow evening, and I have saved the warmest chair.